What's up guys, this is Scarlett, and in this video I want to talk about the real epidemic in our society, and that is the epidemic of sexual trauma. I find it very strange that it's such a common thing to come across people who have experienced sexual trauma in various ways that I'm going to be going through in this video, but it gets so little bit of attention because it's such a taboo topic, and my goal with this channel is to help break these types of taboos and have more open conversation about these types of issues so that we can heal it individually and as a collective. It's very important in Tantra to address these types of traumas because sexual trauma targets the sacral chakra, and if you do not heal and clear this chakra, then like many people, you remain in what is called the lower triangle, and that is your root chakra, your sacral chakra, and your power center. And so instead of reaching your true full spiritual potential, you will be stuck in the impulses of basically animal behavior, stuck in fear and survival, or stuck in needing to generate energy through sexual interactions from other people rather than being a source of energy to yourself, or trying to feel energy through having power over other people and attempting to feel powerful through dominating or aggressively taking over other people. I'm kind of wearing my military style dress because I feel like we're at war right now, but it's a war on consciousness, it's a war on your mind, and it's a war on, are you going to think for yourself, or are you going to follow the rhetoric of what people are telling you and what the media is telling you? A lot of people have heard about all these different scandals that are going on, a lot of sexual distortion, sexual misuse, but there seems to be this collective Stockholm syndrome where people are so shocked and disturbed by what they hear that they don't want to really face it and look at it. And the truth is, if these things are happening collectively, then they're also happening individually, they're happening in families and societies. And so I want to get into a little bit of why this happens in this video. So there are many different levels to trauma, and it ranges from the subtle kind of ideological, religious, and social trauma up until the really aggressive, awful, blunt kind of rape and abuse and molestation type of trauma. Pretty much you can say most people are subjected to the ideological and the moral and social trauma because of all of the shaming and the guilt that we have in our society around sexuality. Pretty much every religion condemns sexual behavior. They'll either tell you that you're going to burn in hell for having sex, or adultery, or having sex before marriage, or anything. Granted, these types of values do have their place, and they help in certain positive ways, but the type of fear-mongering and aggressive suppression of sexuality is what leads to these crazy perversions and abnormal behaviors within our society. It's not a coincidence that in these Catholic churches where they condemn sexuality and are very strict about marriage and divorce, that you find these scandals with priests and just a lot of sexually deviant behavior. And that's because our sexuality is natural, and when people try to suppress it, it gets acted out in unhealthy and uncomfortable ways. The biggest ideological, religious sexual trauma is just the fact that there is such a thing as circumcision, which is absolutely insane. People seem to think that it's normal, and this is kind of what these times are showing us right now, is just because so many people are doing something does not mean that it's normal or correct. If you just think about the idea of circumcision, and a lot of these men these days are really traumatized because as an infant, when you're super fragile, you're super sensitive and you're just getting to learn the world, and you're faced with this huge trauma of being circumcised as an infant, and it's horrifying. It's literally insane, but people have not really questioned this. It's something that's part of religions. It's part of these major Abrahamic religions, so they don't stop to think about it. But I made a video about this, and I interviewed with the bloodstained men who mentioned that a lot of men actually still remember this type of trauma, and it takes a toll on adult men later in their lives. So this is an example, just one of the examples of the ideological, like moral, religious type of trauma. Another type of social religious trauma would be just the kind of shaming that you see in different religions for people to cover up their bodies and to basically have shame in the body, to think that there's something wrong with the body. But the body is just neutral. It's really just people's projections of the body, and it's their own fear of themselves when it comes to the body, that they might want to cover up other people because they don't trust their own sexuality and they don't know how to have control over their own sexuality and their own libido, which everyone can do. It's just people have never been properly taught how to do it. Another way you know that you have sexual trauma is that if you've had poor boundaries in the past, and I see this a lot with people who have things like pity sex or things where they don't feel like they're honoring their body and their choices, but they feel kind of like they're pushed into a sexual interaction and then they sort of regret it later. And this usually comes from things like having a low sense of self-worth and not knowing who you are and not knowing that you have a right to say no to things, or that you can choose to let people down in order to choose for yourself what makes you happy. It's totally possible to heal all these things that I'm going through. It's important to recognize them and to have acceptance that anything that might have happened in the past, that you can heal it and you can purge these energies, and that's what a big part of Tantra is about, is being able to transmute lower emotions and turn it into your personal power. So these are more subtle forms of sexual trauma. There's also a lot of very overt trauma. There's a lot of sexual abuse, often within family, friends, or within families, and it's astonishing to really take that fact in. If you really do the research, it's almost definitely more than a third of the population has had this type of sexual trauma. And these things happen not just on a human level. A lot of this trauma is actually from entities and interdimensional beings and parasites that are kind of possessing or within people. And in this 3D matrix, there's a lot of infiltration from these entities, and they basically feed off of energy. They feed off of human sexual energy because it's such a potent energy. But definitely one of the ways that sexual trauma manifests is if you have a compulsion towards pornography. Porn is one of the biggest hubs for these sexual parasites and sexual energy vampires. And anytime there is this type of energy that's trying to get your attention, to seduce you, to pull you in, that's usually a parasitic type of sexuality. It's not a natural kind of magnetic sexuality the way nature intended, but if it's something that's pulling you in and you can't seem to get away from it and you keep wanting to watch and you keep getting pulled into it, then that's a sexually traumatizing thing to do. It's sexual trauma being played out over and over. And the worst part about porn is that it will give people a sense of shame and guilt. So every time a person orgasms and they feel shame, they're reinforcing that sense of shame in themselves, because the orgasmic state multiplies your energy exponentially. This is why sex magic is really powerful. Another type of sexual trauma playing out is if you feel this incessant need to hook up with people and to extract sexual energy from other people. This is a really tricky one because it is part of our human nature and desire to feel sexual attraction and to enjoy sexuality. But there comes a point if the only thing that makes you happy or the only thing that drives you to go out is just to find someone to extract sexual energy from, to conquer sexually, to just go to bars and clubs and go and really try to find sexual energy, then that's not healthy sexual behavior. Because when you're really comfortable within yourself and you're a source of your own energy, then that stuff happens and it comes naturally and you enjoy it naturally, but it's not an incessant void and parasitic energy within you. Another very interesting thing to think about socially is when we go to bars and clubs. I don't drink anymore, but most of the people have gone through these stages or still go through these stages where they go to bars and they drink and they want to meet people. And it's interesting to think about that when people meet in bars and stuff, you're basically using alcohol to lower your inhibitions, and it's like you're drinking in order to kind of numb yourself out for that sort of sexual interaction. Whereas if you were grounded in yourself and you were coming from a healthy place, you wouldn't need to kind of anesthetize yourself with alcohol in order to connect with someone like that. And that's because your natural self probably wouldn't connect with that person. And alcohol can sometimes be an unhealthy sort of aid to this type of parasitic sexuality. I feel that all these different types of traumas come down to a misunderstanding of sexuality and an embodied sense of shame and guilt. If people were just accepting of their natural sex drive and their natural libido, and they knew how to channel it through all of the chakras, not keeping it just in the lower triangle, then our sexuality and society would look a lot more healthy. We've gone through sort of extremes, like in the 70s where there was this free love movement. On the positive side, that was a lot of love and sexuality and connection, but maybe it was a bit too much. But there was a lot more openness and a lot more acceptance of sexuality. It wasn't so taboo and suppressed. But you see kind of these waves in society where sexuality is accepted and then repressed, but we haven't yet evolved as a species enough to see how to actually be using sexuality in a healthy way. And that's what I believe we're going to be stepping into. So as much as it's taboo even for me to talk about it, and being a female, and people really do sometimes try to project shame onto people and stuff like that. But the truth is, when you are solid in yourself and you know who you are and you are healthy in your sense of self and healthy in your sexuality, then that is the response that you get from the world. So it's time for us to kind of end this hypocrisy of being very judgmental of others, especially women, and putting that sexuality down and then acting out these strange behaviors behind closed doors. And that's everything from the pornography to these other covert types of abuse. We're going through this shift now where we're physically healing these traumas as well as purging these darker entities and parasites from the collective that feed off of people and drive people into these darker behaviors. The main way to heal sexual trauma is to learn how to transmute the energies, to learn how to, on a quantum level, remove others' entangled energies, and to transmute your own sex drive, your own energy, your kundalini energy, raising it from your root up to the crown, up to where it becomes more of a connection to spirit, and your sexuality becomes an aspect of you, but it's not the driving factor behind your life. And when you understand how to work with this energy, you understand what healthy sexuality is, then you know how to have sexuality within the framework of love. And that's one of the most important things, is for us to remember that sexuality and love belong together, and they were never meant to be separated, but that's part of this 3D mutant matrix distortion. I know this is a heavy topic to be talking about, but I'm hoping that by making more of these videos that we can normalize the discussion of dealing with these types of past traumas, past pain, and knowing that it does not define you if you have a sexual trauma, that it's such a social and collective epidemic that it's not a personal thing against any one person. It's just a social issue that everyone is working on healing. This has been such a generational issue. There's so many different cultures and religions where you can lose your life for having sexual behavior, and there's genital mutilation, and there's just so much suppression of sexuality that we've come a long way, but there's still a lot more left to be done to really liberate ourselves and to be able to clear the distortions around sexuality so that we have a healthy, clear channel through all of our chakras and through to allow us to express our Kundalini energy in our full potential in a healthy way. I will be making more videos to help enlighten the collective on how we can remember and reintegrate love within our sexuality, and how to practice healthy sexual expression, how to understand how to balance our energy in all of our chakras, how to be healthy, happy, and the highest expression of ourselves.